Siehst du? Gestanden.
Abend. Ich begrüße Sie herzlich auch im Namen des... Geht das so? Naja, sonst muss ich... Gut, okay. Fangen wir mal so an. Also, guten Abend, mein Name ist Elisabeth Buch. Ich begrüße Sie sehr herzlich im Namen des Verlages, aber auch der Villa Oppenheim, zu einem Abend, an dem wir Maya Lasker Wallfischs zweites Buch, ich schreibe euch aus Berlin, Rückkehr in ein neues Zuhause, präsentieren wollen. Aber wir wollen dieses Buch auch ein wenig feiern und auch Mayas Ankunft hier in Berlin. Für mich ist dieses Buch eine Art Willkommensgeschenk von Mayas Seite aus an uns, ein Buch über Berlin und über ihren Versuch hier ein neues Zuhause für sich zu erschaffen. Welcome Maya. Ich werde nachher kurz die 3 Berlinerinnen, die hier sitzen und das Podium bilden, vorstellen, aber wir wollen jetzt gleich hineinspringen in die Lesung, gleich in die Lesung starten. Den Anfang des Buches wird Maya lesen. Sie wird 3-mal aus ihrem Buch auf Englisch vorlesen. Wir haben hier für Menschen, die gerne auf Deutsch mitlesen wollen, hat Ines Lenkersdorf hinten vom Surkamp Verlag einige deutsche Manuskriptblätter vorbereitet. Es wird auch 2 kurze Lesungen aus der deutschen Übersetzung geben von Dana Vogelke und Gabriele von Amen. Aber nun fangen wir an. Ich wollte nur kurz vorher noch Raphael und Elisabeth Wallfisch im Publikum begrüßen und auch Katharina Wallfisch. Und ich hoffe, dass wir hier auch Anita Lasker Wallfisch begrüßen können, die uns aus London durch technische Möglichkeiten zugeschaltet ist. Also wir hoffen sehr, ich versuche gerade in die Kamera zu schauen, wir hoffen sehr, dass wir in London empfangen werden. So Maya, I said we would jump into your book immediately into the beginning and then we'll start our conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth. My dearest grandparents, I am engulfed in sadness and unanswerable questions. Forgive me for taking this space to try and make sense of my inner turmoil. I do not know who can accompany me, and so I surround myself in your imagined embrace, you who do not silence me. I want to tell you something of my official day of emigration to Germany on the 7th of July 2021. An auspicious date? Certainly one that will be marked in my memory forever. I cannot, of course, compare in a literal way to your experience of packing up your home in Breslau, and it is not my intention. But the ruthless way in which I have, at great speed, discarded loved objects, given away things that I have treasured for many years, and not allowed myself a moment of regret or sentiment, no time for this now, is a new experience for me. I have chosen this path, hence feel that I'm not allowed to struggle, to feel afraid, yet I do. And the courage that has buoyed me up in making this decision seems so elusive now, but I know I must keep this hidden. Do I abandon myself in giving up all that has been the landscape of my life for 63 years to return to the country where you were murdered some 80 years ago? Why, I scream in my head, have I put myself in the midst of so much loss, appointed myself the symbol of continuity? I was not asked, and yet again tried to reinvent myself. Brave or stupid, crazy even, all words that have been attributed to this decision. I spent the last night of my London life in my mother's house, a place that has never felt like home to me. My mother feels like home, but not the space that surrounds her. I slept, or rather didn't sleep, in my father's bed. Life is certainly stranger than fiction. And this new phase in my life was marked by being invited to stay in a place that my father had banished me from some 40 years earlier. I attempted to share this irony with Mum. She sort of got it, and fortunately did not stop me from placing a neutralising bed cover on top of the old familiar bedspread. Soon morning arrived and it was time to leave, to say goodbye. I don't know how to do this, and I don't think Mum does either. So it was as if I was suspended, waiting for something, the right words, the gesture, the hug, all of them, yet none were possible. I know enough about unconscious process to tell myself that so much history was encompassed in this moment, unspeakable, untellable farewells that have been utterly final. I am so afraid that I won't see my mum again. I also feel that she wants me gone, not because she doesn't love me, but somehow I feel I continue to provoke worry or confusion about what it is I want from her. I know what she wants from me. And any weakness I express, any uncertainty about this decision, are absolutely a threat to her wish for peace. I get in the taxi. Mum waved me off, and I think she was relieved to see me go. I have, age 63, left home. All my love, Maya. So it is now August 2020, and I'm on my way to Berlin. Not on holiday, but with a mission. Mission impossible. At least that's what it feels like. Despite the pandemic, I am determined not to allow myself to be diverted from my path. I must go as far as I can. I have many plans. I need to explore whether my long-awaited new life in Germany is feasible. But now I find my beloved Berlin in a state of limbo. Many hotels are closed, and the streets are noticeably quieter than usual. The cafes are deserted, and it feels as if the electricity has been cut off in this electrifying city. I try to ignore it, but it weighs in my mind. In my first book, Letters to Breslau, I promised my grandparents, Alphonse and Edith Lasker, that I would continue my correspondence with them. I would tell them about how my life and that of the Lasker Wallfisches was developing. Also about what had become of my wish to live in Berlin. The many challenges and successes of my long journey home, and about my first steps into a modern Germany that they did not know. New layers of transgenerational trauma are revealed as I embark on this return to the fatherland, along with deeply buried unconscious memories that I had not been aware of until this odyssey began in my search for a return to a new home.
Thank you, Maya, for that very beautiful beginning. Bevor wir unser Gespräch hier vorne anfangen, habe ich eine Frage. Wir können das Ganze auf Deutsch und Englisch machen. Das ist auch so geplant, dass wir auf Deutsch miteinander sprechen und die eine oder andere Übersetzung in kurzer Form dann für Maya, beziehungsweise umgekehrt, wenn Maya auf Englisch spricht, auf Deutsch darbieten. Aber wenn Sie alle sagen, Sie können Englisch, dann ist es natürlich eine lebendigere Veranstaltung, wenn wir einfach miteinander auf Englisch sprechen. Wie sieht es aus? Sollen wir einfach auf Englisch unsere Unterhaltung führen? Wären Sie einverstanden? Also es wäre kein Problem, wenn Sie sagen, lieber eine Übersetzung. Okay, I've asked Maya and actually we can talk with each other in English, which I think will just lead to a more lively discussion. Oh, Gabriele, your English is wonderful. So, let me just quickly say 2 or 3 words to the 3 Berlin ladies sitting here who will be talking about Maya's book, or her books actually, the 2 books. In the middle you see Gabriele von Arnhem. who's a very well-known publicist and journalist, book author here in Germany, and she just published a wonderful book that was very successful, for good reason, called Das Leben ist ein vorübergehender Zustand. Life is a passing condition. Right, life is a passing condition. And I would say its wisdom stems from the fact that it's centered on many, many questions and fewer answers. And these questions lead you along a path, cautiously reflecting. And that's one reason why we thought you might be a beautiful conversation partner for Maya, because your books both have that kind of quality as well, it seems. Dana, sitting here beside me, is a young Berlin novelist, also a journalist, sometimes publishing in newspapers, in the NZZ, in the Neue Zürcher Zeitung. At the moment she's publishing letters with Zelda Biller, bi-weekly, so that's something wonderful to follow. But she made a big splash, which is a good picture to use, a good image to use, last year at the Ingeborg Bachmann Prize in Klagenfurt, the most important German literary award, a succession of readings over several days, and Dana read from her debut novel, which is called Gewässer im Ziplock. That's why I thought the splash would be good. So how would you translate that? Bodies of water in Ziploc, yeah? Waters, yeah, in Ziploc. A debut novel that will be published next year by Zokan, and that received a very prestigious award, and I think you were one of the youngest, or even the youngest person to receive such an award in Klagenfurt with the Bachmann Prize. So that was very special, and many people know about this book, even though it hasn't been published yet. And then, of course, Maya herself, who is eine Wahlberlinerin, as we say, a Berliner by choice. But I think that is a word that doesn't even come close to the existential quality this choice had when you made it, or it still has up till now. Daughter of two musicians, Anita Lasker Wallfisch, well-known cellist. Your father, Peter Wallfisch, was a pianist. Your brother, your family sitting here, all musicians. You have a musical capability, but chose not to walk down that path. And I think,
My voice.
yes, you have that. And I was just going to say, I think with these books, you have gone down a path where you have found a language for yourself, and a language that is expressing a lot about your family, but also about many general topics. And perhaps you want to say you started this book with a letter to your grandparents, and I think with your first book, you ended with a promise to your grandparents, whom of course you never knew. Perhaps you want to tell us about that.
Well, the first book, as some of you may know, began in a sort of, well, I think the word epiphany is correct, because the idea came to me sitting in the Bundestag, I guess 4 years ago, when my mother was giving the address on Holocaust Memorial Day, and I had this thought about what does all this really mean and what's going to happen tomorrow. And I had a series of ideas, one of which was, it's time to write a book, but I want my book to be for Germany in German. Now, bearing in mind at the time I lived in London and don't speak German, eccentric could be the right word. But I had not a grain of doubt that my idea was the right one. I had no idea that it would work, but I knew it was the right idea. So the beginning was really about a journey, quite literally, or rather metaphorically, that became literal, about my discovery of my origins. Having always felt that I've lived in exile, absolutely felt that I lived in exile for 60 odd years, I felt it was time to take up, or at least experiment, because I've done a lot of that in my life, with the life that maybe was meant for me. And so began my odyssey. So at the end of the first book, by the time I finished it, I wasn't here yet, but the idea was formed in my mind that I thought I wanted to. And I imagined where I might live, and I envisaged my apartment that would be in Charlottenburg near Pestalozzi-Strasse, and I envisaged the balcony that would be full of geraniums. Not surprisingly, it was a vision of wonderful photographs that we have of our family's life in Breslau. And that's what I imagined for myself. And I guess using that awful, awful word, I manifested it. And that is what the second book is all about. So my promise was to my grandparents that I imagined myself in this place and that I would let them know what happened. And so I do.
Dana, we were talking this morning and you were saying you were formulating in your mind, pulling together the reactions, the experience you had when you were reading these two books, especially the second one. Yes, please.
I think I was torn between two reactions, and that the first reaction was kind of wanting to say, but it's there, the Jewish life is there, you just have to find it, and it's vibrant, and there's more and more people coming, and I grew up in Kreuzberg, I grew up around the synagogue on Frankenhofer, which is famous for having totally exploded in the last 10 years. When I was a little kid, nobody was there, and now it's chock full of Israelis. We're rebuilding the place because it's too small for all the Jews who are coming on Shabbos, and a lot of non-religious Jews, because that's where they go to see other Jews. I think it's not even a religious thing, but a very, in a way, a secular place full of people looking for other Jews. But then on the other hand, a lot of what I thought was that, because you wrote about magical thinking in the book, and that really stuck with me, because I think that maybe, I always think it's weird to speak of we Jews, because I don't want to speak for anyone, but I think in this case, we Jews in Berlin, we have to do some amount of magical thinking. And maybe that's what we're stuck in all our enthusiasm and all this, but everything is going great, and we have these places, and there's all these Israelis, and I don't know, people fleeing Brexit, and Americans, and it's flourishing, and Jewish life is back, and maybe that's just magical thinking, and that just means that we managed to ignore all that you write about in your book. So in a way, that's kind of what I was torn between, kind of a realization of, and of course nobody ignores, or at least I don't, and everybody I know doesn't ignore the Shoah, or ignore that we think about it every day, and that it's everywhere, and that it's in our little chunk of the synagogue that, is only a little chunk of what used to be there, and it's everywhere, but in a way, we all tend to forget that it's there, because it's always there, it's always been there,
I mean, we live in a city that's almost like a palimpsest. History is written on top of each layer anew and anew, and where the city is full of places where you just have to confront the Shoah, the history, the brutal history that Berlin had. Leading up to a little reading that you will be doing for us, perhaps you want to say how you experience Berlin in that way.
I just love the term magical thinking, because it's not only the past, but I'm incredibly worried about the present, I must say. And what's happening here, I would have never imagined I would have to see again. The kind of anti-Semitism that we have, the attacks that happen in the city, I find so mind-blasting. I mean, it's something I can really barely deal with at this point. So it's kind of, that's something that I read every single day about that. And so the magical thinking, I love it, because kind of, I think it's the only way that you can live here. Not you, but all of us. And we have to have magical thinking in the world as it is at the moment anyway, because otherwise we would kind of, all be sitting here because it's so awful what's happening. And it's I always find it very interesting when people say, well, but how can you, being Jewish, live in Germany? Asking you, who are you? Or coming to Germany. And I always remember Sami Speyer was a Jewish psychoanalyst who's unfortunately died quite a while ago. And he, at a kind of, event like this one, was being asked by a very sensitive German soul, how do you bear living in Germany? And he just kind of, really without hesitation, he said, well, and you? How do you bear it? How do you live in Germany? And I thought this was the best answer one could possibly give to this question, because it's, how do we bear to live here? And how do we bear to see this anti-Semitism, and what do we do? Which is the more important question. And I remember in times when I was younger and more active, and I still lived in Munich, and whenever something happened, again, something that showed the anti-Semitism on the rise, everybody said, well, we'll have to call Rachel Salamander. And I said, what the heck? Why do you want to call Rachel Salamander to ask what do we do against anti-Semitism? I mean, it's up to us to do something about it. And I think this is still true, of course. It's up to us to act and to have a loud voice. I mean, say something and do something and be active. And I get very impatient when I talk to people who just say, oh, it's so terrible, but then that's it, and they don't do anything else.
Gabriele, let's read a little passage from the book. We'll be reading this passage in German. It's actually about confronting the past, the various ways in which people have confronted the past, and we're talking about Berlin. So this is from the chapter Erinnern, Memory, chapter 5.
Das Taxi hält direkt vor dem Bahnhof Grunewald. Ich steige aus und wieder trifft mich das Idyllische dieses Ortes mit voller Wucht. Dieser wunderschöne Bahnhofsvorplatz, in den zwei Kopfsteinpflasterstraßen münden. Auf der einen Seite ein kleiner Biergarten mit grünen Schirmen draußen, gegenüber ein Laden, vor dem Obst und Süßigkeiten in Auslagen liegen. Schön wie aus einem Bilderbuch, so erschien mir dieser Platz, als ich ihn zum ersten Mal sah. Schön wie in einem Märchen. Heute bleibe ich erst einmal stehen, nehme mir Zeit, das Ganze zu erfassen. In schwarzen Großbuchstaben ist es vorne am Bahnhof angezeigt, Gleis 17, Mahnmal. Man kann das Mahnmal entweder über das rechte ansteigende, kopfsteingepflasterte Rampe oder durch einen kleinen Fußgängertunnel erreichen. Der Tunnel ist aus gelben Backsteinen rund gemauert, eine freundliche Architektur. Man geht hindurch und alle 10 Schritte führen Treppen hoch zu den einzelnen Bahnsteigen, nach Osten Ahrensfelde und Strausberg, nach Westen Wannsee und Potsdam. Es ist ein normaler Frühlingstag. Leute schieben ihre Räder durch den Tunnel, führen ihre Hunde spazieren. Vor 4 Jahren kam ich zum ersten Mal hierher, zusammen mit meiner Mutter, begleitet von einem Filmteam. Die Filmleute wollten Mom im Bild haben, wie sie die Treppe von Gleis 17 herunterkommt. Während ich die Treppe hochlaufe, fällt mir die Szene wieder ein. Meine Mutter war alles andere als begeistert von dieser Aufgabe, wieder und wieder dasselbe zu tun, zu posieren. Dann steht man plötzlich auf diesem Rosten, blickt auf die Gleise. Damals traf mich erst dort die plötzliche Erkenntnis, wo ich war, was dies für ein Ort war. Wir wurden von Herrn Kilian begleitet, einem guten Freund meiner Mutter. Ich weiß noch, dass ich genau wie jetzt diese großen, schönen alten Häuser direkt neben den Gleisen erblickte. Grunewaldvillen, unzerstörte Gründerzeithäuser, das Fachwerk auf der Rückseite des Bahngebäudes. Wie kann das sein? Fragte ich damals Herrn Kilian. Diese Häuser stehen so dicht an den Gleisen, die Leute müssen doch alles mitbekommen haben. Sie zogen die Gardinen zu, antwortete Herr Kilian. Meine Mutter blieb gleichmütig. So ist das eben, sagte sie. Meine Mutter wollte wissen, was aus Bergen-Belsen geworden ist, wohin Renate und sie von Herbst 1944 bis Mai 1945 verschleppt worden waren. Da ist sie ganz anders als ihre Schwester Renate. Renate ist an keinen dieser Schreckensorte zurückgekehrt. Es ist ihr für die längste Zeit ihres Lebens gelungen, sich in einer ganz anderen Welt einzurichten. Einer, die weitestmöglich entfernt war von diesem Grauen. Meine Mutter aber will die Orte sehen. Da ist sie ganz klar.
Gabriele, du kanntest Gabriele, you knew Renate?
I knew Renate quite well, yes. She was a good friend, came very close friend over the years. And I guess it's true that she never went back to any of the places, but she was there every single night, I would say, because she really slept very badly. And you talk about your mother kind of, being having like a glassed-in person, that you couldn't get really close to her. And Renate did that too, in a way. It was just very different, because Renate was a very elegant person, and you say at one point that for you, she was really the one who offered and introduced you to beauty and to femininity. And Renate was always very she always had makeup on, and she had her hair done until the very end, I must say. It was amazing. And she was always very elegantly dressed, and it was all matching and wonderful. And but at this, and she was very witty. She was very flirtatious. She was very charming, and could be very sarcastic. And so that was also a wall that she built around her, so that you couldn't come close to her. That was her way of protecting herself. It was just a different way than the one you described about your mother. And but then when you got to know her more, I remember that I think I interviewed her for the first time maybe 35 years ago for the book I wrote then, The Big Silence. And after that we started to talk quite a bit. And she would start telling stories. When I read Bergen-Belsen, I remember that, which was something incredible, that she said, the British in Bergen-Belsen didn't believe the stories we told them about Auschwitz. And so at one point she saw a little sign on one of the doors of one of the British officers that said, "No more gas chamber stories, please." And so she was full of these stories that she used to tell. And I think one of the most intimate moments really was when somehow she had hurt herself, and she had a little wound where the Auschwitz number was. And she said, "Well, what do I do? Should I have it redone?" And so we both bent over her number and discussed whether she should have it redone or not, because it was not, you couldn't read it anymore after this little accident. So she became very open, and she and she suffered, and she enjoyed life too, tremendously, no question about it. And she became, of course, as hopefully most of us, softer and softer over the years. And it was, and to see also the relationship between your mother and her was for me just formidable. It was wonderful, because it was like the two girls in childhood where Renate always had to sit on the Stöpsel auf der Badewanne. I don't know whatever that is in English. Plug. And Renate kept telling the story that she had to sit on the bath plug, and then Anita was always allowed to sit on the other side. And that continued in a way. It was and they had such a soft spot for it. No, it's not a soft spot. They loved each other, and they needed each other, and they were incredibly close with each other. But at the same time, both of them were brusque in a way, and with each other also quite a bit. And when I think when Anita had written the book, it was for Renate not so easy, because she was a little jealous, and she was very relieved, because now she was being asked to. And now she could tell her story too. And but when they were asked to go together, I remember, decades ago, when they were asked to go to Biolek. It was a famous television ban in Germany. And Renate would sit there in the south of France and she said, well, what do I wear? And how do I get a word in when Anita talks all the time? So it was really, the two of them were quite a couple. They were quite amazing.
Well, your book, Maya, I must say, is a book of memory on two levels. It is a book of memory in the larger sense. We'll be talking about returning to Auschwitz. But it is also a beautiful book of very personal memories, and especially this chapter which ends with your balcony being a kind of place of beauty that is also there in memory of Renate. So with this book you have also written a beautiful piece to have Renate endure in this world for many people who didn't have the possibility to meet her personally, and that is actually quite beautiful. In talking about being asked or being not asked, I think one of the big experiences that many people had after surviving the Shoah was that they were not asked what they had experienced, something that I think was unthinkable for them, that they would return into a world where people weren't trying to hear what they had gone through and how they had possibly survived, how it had been possible. So I think your trip, perhaps before you read now from the next chapter, which is a chapter called Healing, Heilen, which is a chapter about trying to find answers, trying to reconnect, trying to bridge that huge gap of silence. Perhaps you want to tell us how it came to be that you took upon yourself this quest, I would almost say, this journey. When you returned, your mother said to you, welcome home, hero. So it was a heroic journey. And perhaps you want to tell us how it came about, and then read from that chapter 7.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Gabriella. It's wonderful for me to hear Renate and their relationship, Mom and Renate's relationship described, because I'm back with them, and that's very special. That's very special. Renate died when I was in Berlin just over a year ago, and I thank God that she got to know I was here, and she was really pleased. She was really, really pleased. So, I guess, as I referred to in the first reading, nobody asked me to do any of this. But I knew that my mother's mission and her contribution to Holocaust education and identity was something I was terribly passionate about, but had never really fully, apart from in the consulting room, found a way to really kind of speak to, in a micro way, the world. I also, in my family, had never really found my place, because I'm not a musician, and I always felt I was the hidden one, because I just hung out for 30 years in an office, and me and my patients, and that was it. And I struggled with that for a long time, but hadn't found a way to have a voice. So as I approached my 60th birthday, I kind of thought, well, Maya, it's kind of now or never. I've reinvented myself many times in my life, not very successfully, but reinventionism, as those that know me well here will attest to. But I'm one that never stands still, I am an adventurer. I think I inherited this from the two sisters, and I'm always up for change. So I decided, and my mother did bestow upon me as well, the wish that I would continue her work, but in my own way. And that's really important to emphasize, in my own way. Because I am Villa Lasker Wallfisch, but I'm the younger version. I'm Maya. So that was really, really important. But how was I going to do that? because it's not about the retelling of my mother's story, it's about going beyond that and making use of my experience of the world and my understanding of psychology and relationships and my own personal struggles within that. So it led me to the decision that I wanted to really try and reach over, because I realised that the trauma is not just on the side of us Jews. I realised that the children, descendants of perpetrators, suffered perhaps even more horrendously, differently and horrendously, and in a way that it's very hard to find a place to talk about. And I wanted to see if I could find a way to speak to that, and I did. And my journey or voyage to Auschwitz, which I will read from shortly, tells of that story, which I want to emphasize changed me, changed all of those of us that were there. And for me, if I channel anything from my mother, it is that I do not judge. I'm interested in humanity and in thought. And how is it that people get to where they are, and that we are all born with the capacity for evil and good, and what is it that happens in the middle? So that for me is really, really, really important, because judging is a waste of energy. So for me, my mission, if you like, is to get beyond that and to debate and engage and be present with the kind of suffering that I'm familiar with, but that I have met those that perhaps have even suffered more than me. And I want to be present with that. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes,
but,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Why don't we
Okay.
go on and read? We'll just have the microphone adjusted for you. So we hear now of this quite amazing journey.
Actually, we need some water because it's very
Yeah.
long reading this one, I'm afraid. Thank you. My dearests, the filmmaker that I've been working with had learned that, having thought about it for some time, I had made the decision to move to Berlin. Her interest in this surprised me, as did her many questions and her incredulity that I described feeling more welcome in Berlin, and that critically my small contribution seemed to invite interest there. It seemed like the perfect storm, looking back. I was at the time in an altered state of euphoria, again magical thinking. Not the most reliable basis for such an important decision to be made. Yet it is also true that had I known how hard the road ahead would be as I moved to another country, none of this would have come to pass. As I write this letter to you, I am aware that many might criticize my actions, but it is my hope that many more, and certainly you, would understand what motivates me, and that it is intended as a conduit to conversations and encounters that would otherwise remain impossible. I was to spend the next 5 days with Jürgen Hess, the son of Rudolf Hess, the commandant of Auschwitz. He was the architect of this horrific place and the biggest mass murderer in the world. With his son Kai, who is my contemporary, we confronted the past and bore witness to the vast crimes that his father and grandfather had committed. Jürgen had lived in Auschwitz in the splendour of the villa, which still stands today, until he was 7 years old. Neither he or his son had ever returned there before. My mother, on whom you bestowed a wisdom and responsibility beyond her tender years, had taught me many things. And as I speak of my fears that there is no place for fear or feeling in Auschwitz, she tells me that I must be grateful that I am not destined for the gas chambers. I cannot argue with this. Mum and I had many discussions about my plan, and she was in full support. The only precaution I took was to stay in a different hotel. It felt essential that our first meeting was not accidental. I did not want to meet over breakfast or in the bar. And so it was that we met in the town of Oswiecim, Auschwitz, which lies 2 miles from the camp. The meeting place was in the last remaining synagogue in the town, which had once had a thriving Jewish community. Now there are no Jews remaining, and this special place was converted back into a synagogue by the last remaining Jew who had died some 10 years earlier. His home, now a cafe, was attached to the synagogue, was the designated meeting place. To say that I was anxious would be an understatement. I sat at a small table and waited. The crew put on my microphone, and I attempted to quiet my mind amongst all the activity that a film crew creates. Everyone present knew what a big moment this was, and I felt a real solidarity surround me. Eventually the moment arrived, and I felt a stillness, a concentration of psychic energy take over. This served me well. As Hess, father and son, joined me at the table, I could feel that their terror was far greater than mine. I looked into Jürgen's downcast eyes, not in confrontation, but more in searching. And what I found was an old man with an immense courage, and these were the first words I shared with him. Kai, who was visibly traumatized, contorted with pain, begged for my forgiveness. My response, what is there to forgive? You are not responsible for the sins of your grandfather. I know that the room was still, as if nobody dared to breathe, as words were exchanged. And so, as this first meeting drew to a close, I knew something far bigger had been present, a dignity that I cannot own for myself, but a vessel had begun to fill. As the adrenaline settled into exhaustion, I returned to the sanctuary of my hotel room, grateful that wisdom had ensured I took the space to prepare for the following day. Entering Auschwitz through an entrance designated for staff was a strange and disorientating experience. Security was extreme because of the special visitors. At 7 a.m, we stood huddled together at the gates in the misty, dank atmosphere. Inevitably, I thought about my mother and her fellow prisoners who every morning and every evening would be marshalled to their positions as they prepared to play their repertoire of marches in sub-zero temperatures, starving and inadequately dressed. This is a sharp reminder of the difference of my circumstances. Eventually it was time for the Hesses and I to enter. Filmed by a drone, we walked along the ramp in silence. There was nothing that could be said. I found myself acutely aware of Jürgen's frailty as he stumbled on the uneven ground with his walking aid, the same as our mother's. I sensed Kai's difficulty in witnessing his father's struggle as we navigated this broken terrain together. I felt the urgency in his need for something from me that is not mine to give. Yet, despite the entirely different circumstances that connected us to this place of horror, we were united in the significance of what had brought us here. Unlike my first visit a quarter of a century earlier, I felt sure of my task. Simple, yet complex, and without doubt, something that would change me forever. The adequate language to describe all that we witnessed together eludes me. but this also reflects the essential need for silence that prevailed as we went from one place of horror to the next. Equally, I cannot tell you what these men, father and son, felt, but I can tell you that the stillness that had visited me on day one of filming seemed to remain. It was, without doubt, the guide or barometer that seemed to tell me when I needed to move closer or to separate myself from the men whose burden and unprocessed trauma was far greater than mine. It is impossible to describe Auschwitz, and that is not my intention. But as we stood together at the ramp where your daughters would have arrived and been processed, heads shaved, tattoos stamped on their arm, stark naked, humiliated and depersonalized, we were united in sorrow. As we stood there together, and without judgment, I took their hands. It was the most natural of gestures in the most surreal of circumstances. I remember saying, I do not envy you. I come from the finest, and you from the worst. This seems a legacy that is irreconcilable. As the last day of filming in Auschwitz came to an end, thoughts turned to our next location. We were flying to London to meet your daughter in her home. She had agreed to meet the Hesses. I arrived late at night to her house. She greeted me with the words, "Welcome home, hero. Tell me everything." The most generous of welcomes, and not what I had anticipated. My thoughts were now on the task we faced the following day. What would this meeting that I was responsible for mean, and had I made a terrible mistake? Morning arrived, along with the expanding film crew, and one of your youngest daughter's least favourite activities began. Disruption of her domestic sanctuary is perilous. Mum needs order and peace. Both were disrupted. The mounting tension as we waited for the Hesses to arrive was directed at the chaos unfolding in her beloved sitting room as the cameras and lights were set up. I kept assuring her that everything would be returned to its correct place. At least it was a distraction from the tension. Eventually, they had now become so familiar to me, and I invited them in to my mother's house. I knew my role in what was to unfold in this meeting was significant in contrast to the days that we had spent preparing for it. I recall your daughter's words as she greeted her unusual guests. Well, who would have thought it? The son and grandson of the commandant of Auschwitz in my house for Kaffee and Kuchen. Simple words, but profound in their truth. Again, adequate words escape me as I try to describe this historic encounter. For myself, I can only tell you what it felt like to be a witness to this occasion. The clarity with which your daughter, Anita, conveyed her compassion for the suffering of these two men, and the curiosity she expressed in her questions about their lives. How do you feel about your father now that you've seen with your own eyes what he was responsible for, she asked. The reply was simple. I feel nothing, nothing at all, shaking his head, his eyes cast to the floor. Probably best, came my mother's reply. So, surrounded by photographs of you both and scenes of the beautiful family life you shared together, I had one thought. The very best and worst of what took place during the Third Reich remain. The worst in those that continue to promote hatred, and the best in those of us that stand united in our attempts to remain a force for the good. All my love, Maya.
chapter, in a way, is the heart of the book, I would say. And Dana, listening to this, I mean, I think we sitting here and imagining this journey, this decision to come to Berlin, to begin a new life here, on this backdrop, places a lot of responsibility on us, on our society here, to deal with the things that Gabriele was remarking about earlier, the surge of anti-Semitism, and trusting that here is a place that can become a home because this society is equipped, we hope, to deal with these developments. It must have been very touching for you also.
Yes, I think it was touching in that respect, especially since I think what you're touching on, or what for me is very interesting, is that I have both. I come from, my father is Jewish and my mother isn't, and I converted to Judaism when I was 10, I think, or 11, so very early in my life, but I come from both. So I have the German background, and I have the guilt and, you know, all that, but I also have the Jewish background, and I have a very strong sense that we always had of our Judaism, and my father instilled that in me, and I think that this scene, in a way, was a contortion of that, or, you know, it rang very true, because it's reality, and I think there's a lot of people like me. Most of the Jews that I know my age don't have two Jewish parents. It's just unlikely, unless, you know, somebody makes shidduch for you. It's unlikely to have two Jewish parents, and for me, that moment was also a metaphor in very many ways. I mean, obviously, it's a very, very metaphorical scene that happened there, but it's also a scene of things being very complicated and things not being easy or black and white, which is what you're describing, though at first you would think so, and at first you would think that there's, you know, there's the shame, and there's the survival and all that, but there's cultural complication. And I think what's in there as well is that what really moved me is the words Kaffee und Kuchen, because what we shouldn't forget is that that your mother is German, and it's not just the Germans, but it's also the German Jews, and it's a language, and it's, you know, a cultural background, and it's something that was ripped from people. And I think that's something very, very important when we keep saying things about, you know, anti-Semitism and how it keeps getting worse. And of course, after Halle, it's gotten incredibly scary to enter synagogues. Obviously, we have, you know, 3 different security services, and still we're scared out of our minds. But at the same time, we're Germans, and we're racked with it.
I remember your mother saying that on the evening, I think on the evening when your grandparents were taken away from their home and their children, they had been reading Don Carlos together, or in the days leading up to that moment. So they were immersed in German culture, and they believed in German culture, and somehow believed that a society that was filled and carried and nurtured by that kind of culture wouldn't be capable of these things.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. But I think, yeah, what is so profoundly remarkable to me in this decision that I've made, and the life that I'm living, which is not easy, and full of cultural dissonance and misunderstanding on the one hand, but also a deep sense of rightness, you know, that my soul is German. I am German, 100% German. Don't speak the effing language, but I am German. That's my mother's fault. But everything in me responds to German culture, whether it's on an aesthetic level, whether it's on the kind of conversations that I can have, whether it's lovely people I meet that I feel a profound and deep connection with. Some of you are Jewish, some are not. but it's a depth that's possible that I have craved my whole life that I never found in the United Kingdom. That's just my experience. So when I began this journey, and the part of the story of this book was about, does Jewish culture still exist, or Jewish life? And for me this has nothing to do with religion, it's to do with what I connect with. And it does exist, and what absolutely exists and can never be destroyed is that on a cellular level, on an epigenetic and cellular level, I am 100% a German Jew. And so in that way I can walk the streets of Berlin and feel sometimes, at best, because I never feel average, at best I can feel really joyful, and at worst I feel the Nazis are all after me and I run back to England and buy a house because I need to run away. Literally, I do not lie. So that's what it's like. But I feel very alive. And that I'm grateful for, because I was dead for a long time. And that has been because I've taken up my right to this life. With all its struggles, but I have a right to this.
Beautiful. So maybe we'll jump now to the reading from the last chapter, chapter number 10, called Jüdin sein in Berlin, which I like very much this title. It's not a Jewish woman in Berlin, but it's being a Jewish woman in Berlin, which I think is very important and picks up on what we were talking about before, that it is a constant, it's a process. It's not something you sort of slip into or comfortably fall into like in a nice easy chair, but it's something that makes you do something, react, reflect every day. Anna.
Ich bin eine Jüdin in Berlin. Vor nun fast 2 Jahren traf ich die Entscheidung, nach Berlin zu ziehen, in die Hauptstadt des Landes, das verantwortlich ist für die Ermordung von Millionen meiner Leute. Ich kam als eine, die einen Faden aufnehmen wollte, an den abgerissenen Faden des Ungelebten anknüpfen. An den vielen verschlossenen Türen der beiden Corona-Jahre vorbei kaum Leben zu finden, erst recht kein jüdisches, war schmerzhaft, oft genug frustrierend. Während des kalten, grauen Winters 2021 ergriff mich Hoffnungslosigkeit. Ich war unsicher, ob ich genug Widerstandskraft hatte, um weiterzumachen, und ich begab mich zurück nach England im Bewusstsein, dass ich nicht alles auf Deutschland setzen konnte. Ich brauchte einen Ort, an dem ich vor diesem beeindruckenden, wie angsteinflößenden Land fliehen konnte. Als ich nun nach Berlin zurückkomme, ist Pessach gerade vorüber. Viele Jahre sind vergangen, seitdem ich das letzte Mal am Seder-Abend teilgenommen habe. All das wirkt seltsam weit weg. Und mich hat es überrascht, als Muscha bei meinem Besuch Bedauern ausdrückte darüber, dass wir nichts Besonderes vorbereitet hatten. Nicht meine Packung Matze hatte den Weg in unser Zuhause gefunden. Kein feierliches Essen, keine Rituale, nichts. Ich dachte, sie habe nie Wert darauf gelegt. Es ist kompliziert in meiner Familie. Wir sind nicht aufgewachsen mit den Ritualen. Sie stecken nicht in unseren Knochen, zumindest nicht in denen der Lebenden. Es ist seltsam, darüber nachzudenken, dass ich Pessach in die Familie zurückgebracht habe, so wie eigentlich alle Feiertage. Jeder einzelne von ihnen bringt mich zurück in die Zeit, als ich Teil der Familie von Rabbi Dr. Louis Jacobs war. Damals schufen sie Verbundenheit und hatten eigentlich nichts mit den Gottesdiensten in der Synagoge zu tun, sondern handelten von der Liebe und dem Respekt, die ich meinem Schwiegervater entgegenbrachte. Ich liebte seine Weisheit, die Predigten, seine Menschlichkeit, und ich liebte seine Synagoge auf der berühmten Abbey Road. Sie ihrerseits waren umgekehrt stolz darauf, mit mir die Tochter einer Überlebenden in der Familie zu haben. Und jetzt bin ich zurück in Berlin. Wieder ist Frühling und die Stadt, in die ich mich verliebt habe, erwacht zum Leben.
Danke. Thank you, Dana. I think you can say something especially about this passage because it describes a Berlin that is very much your Berlin, that Maya is entering.
Well, I think what I noticed, or what was really interesting to me, was in the entire chapter actually, the kind of counterplay between looking for a way to be Jewish without being religious, and how difficult that is in Berlin. And that's kind of what I talked about earlier already. If we want to meet other Jews, we go, where do we go? To shul, because you don't meet them on the street. They probably don't even recognize them on the street because they wouldn't wear a kippah. And I think that opens something that to the end of your book is very important, but that really, that you managed to describe extremely well, this rift between there being a kind of, natural way of being Jewish that you don't have to think about, that's possible in London, that's possible in New York, it's possible in Israel, and that isn't possible in Berlin because the Nazis were, in a way, successful. And that kind of pushes people into religion because suddenly Pesach has a meaning. Suddenly, it's about being in the diaspora, and it's about next year in Jerusalem, and it suddenly becomes heavy and kind of sad. Whereas in London, maybe it was just, an occasion to eat really good food and have a good time and get really drunk. And I think that that's something that you point out that was very, very concise and sharp, and also earlier in the book describing looking for a loaf of challah. And to me, obviously, if I want to eat challah, there's like 3 bakeries in Berlin where you can travel with the train, or you just make it yourself. So if you want to have it, you bake it. And I know how to make it, because if I want to eat it, I make it. And there's something, for me, it's totally clear that obviously, and if I want to go to a supermarket and buy challah, I have to go to the States. And, but I've never doubted that. It's fine. Whatever, I'll just make my own challah. It's not that hard. But it must be really hard if you've been able to go into a supermarket for, 63 years, buy a loaf of friggin' challah, bring it home and eat it, and then suddenly you have to figure out what it's like to make it. And I think that's really, in a way, it's a tragic but also kind of funny or cynical essence to the book that, to me, from a Jewish perspective, was very important. Kind of hysterical, makes you kind of hysterical and kind of.
Yes, I think, and the humor. So, Maya, maybe you
just
want to.
didn't cut it.
Yeah.
I really tried to convince myself that sesame bread was going to do
No.
it for me, and it just didn't.
There's one place, Fine Bagel. It's Villa Oppenheim.
Yeah,
Go there.
yeah.
And you buy 5 loaves and you freeze them.
So Maya, maybe you want to say a few words to what Dana was remarking. I think it is quite a good comment to explain how things work here in Berlin and no other place, or here in Germany or no other place. And meanwhile, if anybody wants to ask a question, we'll have time for 2 or 3 questions after this, before Maya reads the final letter. So Maya.
Yeah, being Jewish in Berlin is a conundrum. It's extraordinary and complex, and everything from trying to find a loaf of challah to getting into a synagogue by all kinds of strange undercover behaviour on my behalf, because I refuse to join a synagogue, but I'm getting in there.
Yeah, I want to say your book is also very funny in some passages. It hasn't been apparent up till now, but it actually is.
It's because I guess part of my what I felt when I began this journey was that I wanted to follow my nose. That I wasn't going to be I couldn't be terribly organised about it beyond where I was living, because I didn't know what was going to happen. And God laughs when you make plans anyway. So I thought, well, I'll have to smell it out. And that's kind of what happened. And I found one of the biggest difficulties that I had in my attempt to assimilate into German life as a Jew, as a returning Jew, was, it's really strange, obviously not this evening, but I would never walk around with this showing, because nobody told me that I shouldn't or couldn't, but I noticed once that somebody looked at it and I wasn't comfortable, so I decided, well, I'll just put that away. It doesn't need to be seen. Which wasn't about hiding something, but was about some sort of self-protection, I guess. I knew that for me, Jewish life was not going to be found in synagogues, yet I was drawn to synagogues on Yom Tips, on days of, high holidays. And it was very painful for me, because my first year was COVID, that nobody invited me. So I was a very lonely Jew in Berlin in that first year. Very lonely Jew. But I took myself to Pestalozzi-Strasse, which is around the corner from where I live, and I stood outside the synagogue on the other side of the road, and I have to tell the truth. I'd been to the bakery, this is Yom Kippur, I'd been to the bakery, so I had shopping. And I stood on the other side of the road watching security, and I'm thinking, will I, won't I, will I, won't I, what will I do? So I was watching for about 20 minutes, and then I thought, I'm crossing the road. I'm going to cross the road because I look more weird standing here, and I was not dressed for shul, and I certainly was not bag free. So I crossed the road and I said to security, obviously in English, hello, I'm Jewish. Please can I come in? I still was using my mother use I'm the daughter of Villa Lasker Wallfisch, and I had on my handy the picture of me and my mum, which is always on my handy. Oh, yes, okay. And I was in. Now, I would not have got in London, I'm telling you now. I would have had to have produced a lot more ID than that, because mum is so wonderful. So I was in the synagogue. And Pestalozzi-Strasse, most of you here will know, but those who don't, I really encourage you to go. It's a place of such beauty. And I was in this place, and I sat in the women's gallery, because even though I'm not a traditionalist, my years in Judaism, which I did have some, was in Orthodox Judaism, and I really like separate seating. I just feel like, yeah, I like this. And I sat in the gallery, the women's gallery, and there weren't many people there because it was COVID. And I sat and I sobbed and I howled but I felt completely cool. And you know what? They didn't check my bags for bread. And I just thought this was quite remarkable, because I could have had anything in there. It was bread, but still not normal behaviour on Yom Kippur. I've been back a few times since with Marguerite to see it tonight, and I feel, and it has nothing to do with what goes on in there, but I feel, I love the building, I love the energy in the building, I love the architecture, I love the fact that it's survived, partly because it's hidden in the courtyard, and I love the fact that for hundreds of years, our people have been into these places and repeated the same rituals, and now there was I. And this, for me, was transcendent of anything religious. It was a symbolic metaphor for, well, we're here.
Yeah.
We're here.
Wonderful. Any comments, any questions from the audience at this moment? Yes, I was going to ask you something, Gabriela, but you go ahead.
I have a question, because here you are, being German, having a German passport, but somehow you say, I can't learn German. So there must be some kind of, an inner reluctance. Or what is it?
No, I had to say, Lali, last night, this is my brother, Raphael, I was amused because we were at another event yesterday and my brother was on the stage and the discussion was in German. And I was relieved, it gave me great pleasure when you said, could you please translate to English? And I thought of Mum, and I just thought, oh gosh, it's not only me, because I get it in the neck. I mean, Raphael's German, I think, is better than mine, but still, it's not good enough to be able to confidently be on a panel. And so I thought, well, it's not only me. No, our mother, we were brought up in a house that all we knew was that we were rather odd. Well, I speak for myself. We were unusual. We had German parents who spoke German to each other, but they did not speak German to my brother or I. And so there was a subliminal message that this language was not meant for us. And As a consequence, I did not absorb it. And I am quite a good linguist, and, you know, writing and speaking is my craft. German, schrecklich. Apart from my few very well practiced, which those of you that know me well also know very well what I say repeatedly, but it's really difficult for me. Yet I also feel if I'm left alone, like I can watch a film and I know, well, if I know what the story's about, I kind of know what I'm hearing. So there's another level as well, but the actual speaking, unless I'm doing a ridiculous takeoff, which is not really how I can go around speaking German, then I sound very good. I'm doing a ridiculous, you know, but I can't really go into the supermarket saying, I tried it once or twice, it didn't go down well. You know, so I struggle. I don't have a natural way of speaking German.
May I ask one more question?
Of course.
I have one more question, really, because you said at one point that in your family you were not being seen, and because they had their musical language and kind of, you know, Raphael played with his father and music, and you were kind of out of it and you were not being seen. But now, having written these 2 books, you feel that you're being seen for the first time. Has that really changed your life tremendously?
I feared you were going to ask me something like that, because I remember after the first book over dinner, you said to me, what does it feel like to be famous, Maya? And I'm like, what? No, that doesn't belong to me. Yeah. I see myself. I see myself. I stood in Auschwitz-Birkenau by myself and I said, so this is who you are, Maya Lasker Wallfisch. So what these books have given me in the experience is I see myself. I can't speak for whether I feel seen by other people, but I do see myself. And I don't mind on some days what I see.
Good, that's lovely. That's lovely. Well, I can only say this was a beautiful conversation that I enjoyed listening to, because it opened up so many aspects of your book, and it shows how your book touches on very deep aspects, topics that are very far-reaching and very general, but at the same time it has this beautiful personal touch to it, these personal moments, one of them being about your late aunt, Renate, whom I'm glad we talked about tonight as well. And before you read the final letter, the letter of farewell to your grandparents, I wanted to say that Surkamp has invited all of us to a glass of wine and a bit to eat afterwards, and there's a table with books. Maya will be signing. And I hope we all stay together a bit to celebrate this beautiful second book. And I thank Gabriele and Dana, who brought very different aspects into this conversation and showed how interesting and complex this book is. And I thank you, Maya, for giving us this book, for coming to Berlin, for trusting us here, in a sense, trusting that you might find a new home here, which of course you have to build yourself, but writing this book is part of it. And I can only say we wish you all the best, and we're glad you're here, and we'll love to hear the last letter. Thank you.
One was that, as I'm sure it's clear to most of you, but I still want to say it, that these books represent the graves that don't exist for our grandparents. And I wanted to somehow put something in the world that, please God, will somehow, even if it remains in a remains box somewhere, it's there, it's physical, it's something that can be held. And I wrote them in a hurry. I wrote 2 books in 2 years. Is it 2.5 years? Yeah. And I needed it's very important to me that Renata, thank God, so the first one, was very proud, and our mother, it's really, really important that she got to see that. So that was a huge part of my energy behind, got to do this now. So that's also what these books represent, and I'm lucky that I had the opportunity, and I'm grateful also to you, Elizabeth, for believing in me when you met me a few years ago and I came with my ideas, and I'm grateful to everybody in the room who supported me and helped me in this tough but chosen and correct choice of mine. And my wish is that my life can thrive here, and that I have the opportunities to do the work that I want to do. So that's what it's all about. Dearest grandparents, I returned to Berlin 4 weeks ago. It is now May, and spring brings with it renewed hope. I left Berlin for London in January. It felt as though I was running away from an overwhelming sense of dislocation and loneliness. I have felt invisible here in Berlin, in all the ways that I wish to be seen, and glaringly visible in ways that I sense I have felt judged or not understood, and thus to find a way to be, if I can make it my place to be, must be rethought. I must tell you that as the weeks passed in the United Kingdom and I readjusted to life there, the idea of returning to Berlin was not easy. I had in part used the time away to reflect on the particular vulnerability I felt as a returning Jew. That I experience unconscious bias is all around me. And despite my fully German blood, culturally, I have not been well prepared. So many misunderstandings that leave me both confused and somehow feeling wrong. The other undeniable realization was that I don't fully belong anywhere. This is in some way liberating. Many have been surprised, shocked even, that I have no attachment to the city where I was born and lived for 62 years. I have learned that my connections are formed through atmosphere and understanding. Now I can begin to imagine how the possibility of my dual Anglo-German identity could be a real possibility. In its being a pathway to the work and legacy that I so want to contribute to here in Germany, and by so doing honouring our family and all those that have no voice. This must be more than a fantasy. There is work to be done as we face the ongoing challenge of anti-Semitism, and I want to be part of it. And so, my dear ones, this time I am not running away. I will return to my Altbau in Charlottenburg, which, as I write to you from my balcony, overflows with geraniums, with the added pleasure that I shall be looking forward to meeting new friends that welcome me. This thought warms my heart. Perhaps my dearest mother's faith in me and my capacity to endure has not been misplaced after all. You, my dearest grandparents, my guardian angels, along with my beloved Aunt Renata, can smile down upon me. I cannot bear to say goodbye. I need to keep your essence close to me. All my love, Maya. These are some of my wonderful friends who